Imagine being told your lover was a demon who shapeshifted into a black cat, or that a powerful duchess plotted to kill the king using a tiny wax doll and dark spells. Some women confessed to smearing themselves with strange ointments to fly off to secret night parties. Even a future saint, a national hero, faced charges that her holy visions were actually whispers from evil spirits. One woman was accused of turning love potions into deadly poisons, while another reportedly stole holy bread from church to use in magic rituals. And get this, some women said they met a mysterious lady of the game at these secret gatherings, where they even fought other spirit groups. Life in medieval times could be pretty scary, especially if someone decided you were a witch. Number 7. Jeanne de Brigue, the Parisian fortune teller who got burned for her gifts. Picture Paris in the late 1300s. It's a bustling city, but also one where people whisper about magic and spirits. Living there was a woman named Jeanne de Brigue, also known by the nickname Naquette. She wasn't a noble lady or a powerful merchant. Instead, Jeanne was known for something else entirely. She was a seer, a diviner, someone people went to when they wanted a peek into the future, or a little magical help. But having a reputation for knowing things others didn't could be a dangerous game back then. And for Jeanne, it turned deadly. Around 1390 or 1391, she found herself in serious trouble with the authorities. She wasn't just accused of telling fortunes with cards or reading palms. Oh no, the charges were way more serious. The official accusations painted Jeanne as someone deeply involved in dark arts. They said she didn't just predict the future, she summoned demons to get her information. One demon she supposedly called upon was named Beric, a pretty sinister-sounding entity. The authorities claimed Jeanne had made a pact with this demon, promising something in return for magical powers. What exactly she promised wasn't always clear, but pacts with demons were a huge no-no, basically like signing a contract with ultimate evil. It didn't stop there. Jeanne was also accused of using holy objects for unholy purposes. One of the most shocking claims was that she used consecrated hosts, the special bread blessed during communion in church which believers felt became the body of Christ for her magic spells. This was considered a terrible sacrilege, a deep insult to God and the church. Imagine the horror people felt hearing that. What kind of spells was she supposedly casting? Well, some were for love. People back then, just like now, wanted to find love or make someone love them. Jeanne was accused of making love potions, brews designed to ensnare the heart of an unwilling person. But her alleged magic wasn't all about romance. She was also said to create wax images, little dolls made to look like people. These weren't for playing with. The idea was that whatever you did to the doll would happen to the person it represented. So, if you stuck a pin in it or melted it near a fire, that person would suffer pain or even die. Pretty creepy stuff. Jeanne wasn't alone in these accusations. Another woman, Margot de la Barre, was caught up in the same investigation, accused of similar magical dealings. It seems the authorities were convinced there was a whole network of sorcery happening. What happened during Jeanne's trial? Well, medieval trials for things like witchcraft weren't like the courtroom dramas you see on TV. Often, getting a confession was the main goal, and the methods used could be brutal. It's highly likely that Jeanne confessed to these incredible charges, but it's just as likely that her confession came after intense pressure or even torture. The records from these times often show people admitting to all sorts of unbelievable things when faced with terrible pain or the threat of it. Her reported confessions were detailed, describing her methods, the names of demons she supposedly invoked, and the rituals she performed. The outcome for Jeanne de Brigue was grim. Found guilty of these terrifying crimes of sorcery and heresy, she was condemned to the most severe punishment. In 1391, Jeanne was taken to a public square in Paris and burned at the stake. This was a common, horrifying end for those deemed to be in league with the devil or a danger to Christian society. Her execution would have been a public spectacle, a warning to others about the dangers of straying from the Church's path. What makes Jeanne's story so chilling? It's the combination of her everyday profession, a fortune teller, someone people sought out, with the extreme diabolical nature of the accusations. The details of her supposed pacts, the twisted use of religious items, and the very real, very public and fiery end she met, paint a terrifying picture of how quickly suspicion could turn into a death sentence in medieval Europe. Number 6. Marjorie, Jourdain, the Witch of Eye, and a scandal that rocked the royals. Imagine being so well known for your mystical skills that even the highest nobles in the land came knocking on your door. That was Marjorie Jourdain, a woman who lived in 15th century England, specifically near Westminster, which is why she got the nickname the Witch of Eye next Westminster. She wasn't a grand lady herself, but she certainly moved in interesting circles. Marjorie's story wasn't one of sudden accusation. She'd actually had a few run-ins with the law about sorcery-related stuff before things got really serious. It seems she had a reputation that preceded her, one that mixed healing, charm-making, and perhaps things that authorities considered a bit too close to forbidden magic. But her most famous and fatal involvement came in 1441, and it was a doozy tangled up with power, politics, and the royal family itself. The big accusation against Marjorie was that she was a key player in a plot to harm, or even kill, King Henry VI. And how was she supposed to do this? Not with a knife or poison in the usual sense, but with sorcery, specifically through the use of a wax image of the king. The idea was that Marjorie, using her dark arts, had crafted this doll in the king's likeness. By slowly melting it or sticking pins into it, the plotters believed they could make the king waste away and die. This wasn't just any old witchcraft. This was treasonable sorcery, aiming at the very top. She was also accused of necromancy, which is the super creepy practice of trying to communicate with the dead, often to gain forbidden knowledge or power. Who was behind this alleged plot? The main figure accused alongside Marjorie was none other than Dame Eleanor Cobham, the Duchess of Gloucester. More on her later. But Marjorie was seen as the magical muscle, the one with the know-how to actually carry out the spells. When the accusations came to a head, Marjorie was tried, though her trial was handled differently from Eleanor's due to their different social standings. Several other people were implicated too, including a learned cleric named Thomas Southwell and an astrologer and alleged necromancer named Roger Bolingbroke. Their testimonies, likely given under extreme pressure, helped seal Marjorie's fate. Bolingbroke even had to publicly display the tools of his supposed necromancy, Things like wax figures, special swords, and copper rings, which must have looked incredibly sinister to the public. For Marjorie Jourdain, the verdict was guilty. She was convicted of heresy because such magic was seen as anti-Christian, and witchcraft. Her punishment was the most extreme. On October 27, 1441, Marjorie was taken to Smithfield, a famous execution site in London, and burned at the stake. What's so startling about Marjorie's case? First, her long-standing reputation as a wise woman or witch shows how some people made a living on the fringes of accepted practice. Second, her connection to a high-profile political plot involving the royal succession is like something out of a medieval thriller. The very specific image of the wax doll, slowly melting to represent the king's decline, is a powerful and disturbing one. It highlights how deeply people believed in the power of sympathetic magic. Marjorie's end was brutal, a stark warning to anyone, commoner or noble, who dared to dabble in what the authorities considered the dark arts, especially if it threatened the crown. Her story serves as a grim reminder that in a world of political intrigue, accusations of witchcraft could be a powerful weapon. Number 5. Dame Eleanor Cobham, the ambitious duchess, who plotted with magic and lost everything. Eleanor Cobham was no ordinary woman accused of witchcraft. She was a duchess, the second wife of Humphrey, Duke of Gloucester. Humphrey was a very important man. He was the uncle of the young King Henry VI and had even served as Lord Protector, meaning he helped rule England while the king was a boy. So Eleanor was right at the heart of English power and society in the mid-1400s. She was also known to be ambitious. Maybe a little too ambitious for her own good, as it turned out. In 1441, a massive scandal erupted, and Eleanor was right in the middle of it. The accusations against her were incredibly serious: treasonable necromancy. That's a fancy way of saying she was accused of using forbidden magic, particularly trying to communicate with spirits or raise the dead, to harm King Henry VI, and to find out if her husband would become king. If the king died without children, Humphrey was next in line to the throne, and Eleanor would become queen. Talk about high stakes. The story went that Eleanor had hired a team of magical practitioners to help her with this dangerous scheme. These included Marjorie Jourdain, the Witch of Eye, Roger Bolingbroke, an Oxford scholar and astrologer, Thomas Southwell, a canon and physician, and John Hume, or Home, her personal chaplain. Together, they were accused of a range of magical activities. They supposedly cast horoscopes to predict the king's death. They were said to have made a wax image of King Henry VI, which they intended to melt slowly to make him ill and eventually die. A classic sorcery accusation. The trial was sensational, the talk of the town, and indeed the whole kingdom. Imagine the shock: a duchess, someone so close to the throne, accused of such dark and treasonous deeds. Roger Bolingbroke was forced to publicly confess his role and display his supposed instruments of necromancy, strange charts, wax figures, and other magical paraphernalia outside St. Paul's Cathedral. This was designed to shame him and to show everyone the supposed reality of the dark arts. Things unraveled quickly for Eleanor and her associates. Thomas Southwell died in the Tower of London before he could be executed. Some said he took his own life. Roger Bolingbroke was found guilty of treason and was hanged, drawn, and quartered a particularly gruesome form of execution. Marjorie Jourdemain, as we know, was burned at the stake for witchcraft. And what about Eleanor, the Duchess at the center of it all? As a noblewoman, she wasn't executed, but her punishment was severe and designed to utterly humiliate her. She was convicted of sorcery and treason. First, she had to perform public penance. This involved walking barefoot through the crowded streets of London on 3 separate market days, carrying a taper, a wax candle, to St. Paul's Cathedral and other churches, confessing her crimes. Can you imagine the scene? A duchess, stripped of her finery, shamed before the very public she once moved among with pride. After this humiliation, she was divorced from her husband, Duke Humphrey, stripping her of her title and status. Then, she was imprisoned for life. She was moved between various remote castles, including Kenilworth Castle and eventually Beaumaris Castle in Wales, where she died in 1452, a broken and disgraced woman. Her husband Humphrey also suffered politically from the scandal, losing influence at court. Eleanor Cobham's story is so shocking because of her high status. It wasn't just village healers or poor old women being accused here. This was someone from the very top echelons of society. The accusations were deeply intertwined with political rivalries at court. Some historians believe Eleanor's enemies used the charges of sorcery to bring down both her and her powerful husband. Whether she truly believed in and practiced these things, or was simply a victim of political maneuvering, her fall was dramatic and complete. Her very public shaming and life imprisonment sent a clear message. No one, no matter how noble, was above suspicion or punishment if they were perceived to be dabbling in forbidden powers, especially if those powers could threaten the king himself. Number 4. Pierina de Brigue, the mysterious woman who said she rode with the Lady of the Game. Let's travel to northern Italy, near Milan, in the late 14th century. Here we meet a peasant woman named Pierina de Brigue, or sometimes Pierina de Brigue. Her story is fascinating because it gives us a peek into a world of folk beliefs that the church authorities found deeply troubling and tried to label as witchcraft. Pierina wasn't accused of making evil potions or harming her neighbors in the way many other accused witches were. Instead, her supposed crime was connected to something called the Game, or the Society of Diana, sometimes presided over by a mysterious figure known as Madonna Oriente, which could mean Lady of the Orient, or Lady of the East, or even Lady of the Dawn, or Radius. Pierina was interrogated by inquisitors twice, first in 1384 and then again in 1390. And what she described was pretty wild. She confessed, perhaps under pressure, to being part of a group of women, and sometimes men, who went on night journeys. But get this, she said they didn't physically go. Instead, their spirits would leave their bodies, which lay as if asleep or dead, and travel to these secret nocturnal gatherings. At these gatherings, led by Madonna Oriente, they weren't said to be worshipping the devil or engaging in evil acts, at least not in Pierina's initial descriptions. Instead, she claimed they did things like enter the houses of the rich to eat and drink from their cellars, bless the homes of good people, and ensure the fertility of crops and livestock. They believed they were doing good things for their community, in a way. Pierina even said that Madonna Oriente would teach them about the virtues of herbs and how to find lost or stolen things. One of the strangest parts of her confession was the idea that these night-traveling groups sometimes fought other groups of spirits or witches, If Madonna Oriente's group won, it meant a good harvest and prosperity for the region. If the evil witches won, then famine or disaster would follow. So, in a way, Pierina saw herself and her companions as a kind of spiritual defense force. However, the inquisitors listening to this were not impressed. They were trained to see anything supernatural outside of church doctrine as demonic. So they pushed Pierina, trying to get her to admit that Madonna Oriente was actually a demon, and that these night flights and gatherings were really diabolical sabbats. After her first interrogation in 1384, Pierina actually recanted her confession, saying she had made it all up. But then, in 1390, she was called in again. This time, her story changed a bit. While still describing the games and Madonna Oriente, she started to include elements that sounded a bit more like what the inquisitors wanted to hear, though she never fully admitted to worshipping the devil or intentionally causing harm in the way that later witch trial confessions would detail. For example, she mentioned that if they didn't obey Madonna Oriente, they would be beaten. The final outcome for Jeanne de Brigue herself isn't entirely clear from the surviving records after her 1390 interrogation. Other women in the Milan area who confessed to similar night journeys with figures like Madonna Oriente or La Signora del Gioco, the Lady of the Game, around the same time, like a woman named Sibilia Zani, were sometimes sentenced to penances like wearing crosses on their clothes or going on pilgrimages. It's possible Pierina received a similar sentence. What's so mind-blowing about Pierina's case, and others like it from that era in Italy, is that it shows a layer of folk belief that was probably quite old, perhaps even pre-Christian in its origins. These good women who go by night, as they were sometimes called, didn't see themselves as evil witches. They thought they were part of a special secret society that brought good fortune. But the church, with its growing concern about heresy and demonic influence, started to reinterpret these beliefs. The Lady of the Game was recast as a demon in disguise, and the night journeys became evidence of a witch's pact. Pierina's story is a window into this fascinating and often misunderstood clash of worlds, where ancient folk traditions were being squeezed into the terrifying new framework of diabolical witchcraft. It makes you wonder what people truly believed and what they were forced to say. Number 3, Matuccia Francisci, the Witch of Todi, who confessed to flying on a goat to a demonic party. Travel with us now to Todi, a town in central Italy, in the year 1428. This is where we find Matuccia Francisci, a woman whose trial for witchcraft produced some of the most vivid and frankly terrifying confessions of the time. She wasn't a noble or involved in high politics. She seems to have been known locally as a healer, someone who dealt in charms, potions, and perhaps fortune-telling. But her skills, or what people believed her skills to be, eventually led her to a fiery end. Matuccia was brought before a secular court, which was common in some parts of Italy for witchcraft cases, especially if they involved maleficium. That's the act of causing harm through magic. And the list of accusations against her was long and disturbing. She was accused of selling love potions, which might sound harmless enough, but these potions were also said to be capable of causing illness, or even death, if things went wrong or if she intended harm. She was accused of being able to magically heal illnesses, but also to cause them. Some even said she could conjure hailstorms to destroy crops, a classic fear in agricultural societies. But the most sensational part of her alleged crimes, and the part that really shows the developing stereotype of the witch, was her confession about flying and attending a witch's sabbat. Under interrogation, and it's almost certain that torture, or the threat of it, played a huge role in extracting these details. Matuccia described how she would travel to a notorious gathering place for witches. In Italian folklore, this was often a specific walnut tree, the walnut tree of Benevento, though she mentioned a devil's tree. And how did she get there? She didn't walk or ride a horse. Matuccia confessed to flying. She said she would anoint herself, or sometimes a goat she rode, with a special ointment. The recipe for this flying ointment, as she described it, was truly gruesome. It was supposedly made from the fat of unbaptized babies or aborted fetuses, mixed with other vile ingredients like the blood of bats or owls, and various herbs. The very idea of such an ointment was designed to shock and horrify. Once she arrived at this demonic gathering, Matuccia said she and other witches would pay homage to the devil, often by kissing his backside as a sign of submission. They would feast, dance, and engage in all sorts of wild and forbidden activities. She even named other women from the Todi area, whom she claimed were also present at these sabbats, spreading the net of accusation wider. Her trial records detail these confessions at length. She spoke of transforming into a cat, of using powders to make people fall in love or to harm them, and of having learned her arts from another woman. Whether any of it was true, or if it was the product of leading questions, fear, pain, and a desire to tell her interrogators what they seemed to want to hear, is impossible to say for sure now. But the facts, as presented in her confession, were damning. The court found Matuccia Francisci guilty. For her confessed crimes of diabolical witchcraft, harmful magic, and consorting with demons, she was condemned to be burned at the stake. Her execution would have served as a terrifying public lesson. Matuccia's case is incredibly significant because her confession contained so many of the elements that would become central to the image of the witch in the centuries that followed. The pact with the devil, the night flight, the magical ointment, the demonic Sabbat with its feasting and obscene rituals, and the betrayal of other supposed witches. It's a chilling example of how the fears and fantasies about witchcraft were being fleshed out and recorded, creating a template that would lead to the persecution of many thousands more. The sheer gruesomeness of the details she confessed to, whether real or imagined, painted a picture of witchcraft that was utterly evil and terrifying to the medieval mind. Number 2. Joan of Arc, the saint who was tried as a sorceress and heretic. Everyone knows the name Joan of Arc, or Jeanne d'Arc. She's the peasant girl from Domremy, France, who, in the early 15th century, claimed to hear divine voices. These voices, she said, belonged to Saint Michael, Saint Catherine of Alexandria, and Saint Margaret of Antioch. They told her to drive the English out of France during the brutal 100 Years' War, and to see the Dauphin, Charles VII, crowned as king. And incredibly, she did lead the French army to some astonishing victories, most famously lifting the siege of Orleans in 1429. She became a symbol of French hope and resistance. But her amazing rise was followed by a tragic fall. In 1430, Joan was captured by Burgundian soldiers who were allied with the English. They sold her to the English, who were desperate to discredit her, and by extension King Charles VII, whose legitimacy she had helped establish. They decided to put her on trial, not as a prisoner of war, but as a heretic and a witch. The trial, which took place in Rouen in 1431, was a politically motivated sham run by pro-English clergy, most notably Bishop Pierre Cochon. While the main charge was heresy, accusations of witchcraft and sorcery were deeply woven into the proceedings. How else could her enemies explain her incredible military successes and her uncanny influence? It had to be the devil's work, they argued. Her divine voices and visions, the court declared them to be deceptions from demons, not messages from God. They grilled her relentlessly about the nature of these voices, trying to trap her into saying something that sounded unorthodox or blasphemous. They asked if the saints appeared to her in physical form, what they wore, if they had hair, if they smelled nice, all trying to find inconsistencies or details that could be twisted into something sinister. One of the biggest points against her was her insistence on wearing men's clothing. For a woman to dress as a man was considered an abomination, a defiance of God's natural order, and something associated with witchcraft or heresy. Joan argued she wore it, for practical reasons, on campaign and to protect herself from assault by soldiers while imprisoned. But the court saw it as further proof of her deviance. They also brought up other, more classic witchcraft accusations. There were whispers that she used mandrake root, a plant often associated with magic for luck, or that she had cast spells on her battle banner to ensure victory. They questioned her about a fairy tree near her village, suggesting she had participated in pagan rituals there. Joan consistently denied any involvement in sorcery, maintaining that all her power and guidance came from God. Joan, though unlettered, showed incredible courage and quick wit during her long and grueling interrogations. She often parried the complex theological questions of her accusers with simple, devout answers. However, the odds were stacked against her. She was held in a secular prison, guarded by rough male soldiers, subjected to constant harassment, and denied proper legal counsel. Under immense pressure, and possibly after a threat of immediate burning or some form of trickery, like a misleading document she couldn't fully read, Joan briefly signed a form of abjuration or recantation, promising to give up men's clothes and submit to the church. Her sentence was commuted to life imprisonment. But just a few days later, she was found wearing men's clothes again. Why she did this is debated. Some say it was an act of defiance. Others that her female clothes were taken away, or that she feared for her safety in women's attire among her guards, or that she felt she had betrayed her voices by recanting. Whatever the reason, this relapse was exactly what her enemies needed. It proved she was an unrepentant heretic. On May 30th, 1431, Joan of Arc, barely 19 years old, was taken to the marketplace in Rouen and burned at the stake. Eyewitnesses said she called on the name of Jesus until the very end. The shocking part of Joan's story, in this context, is how a figure of such profound faith, who achieved so much and became a national hero, could be so thoroughly and cruelly transformed into a heretic and a witch by her enemies. Her trial highlights the terrifying power of political manipulation within a religious framework. The fact that charges like cross-dressing or claiming direct divine inspiration without church approval could lead to a fiery death is a stark reminder of the rigid and often brutal worldview of the time. Of course, Joan's story doesn't end there. About 25 years later, in 1456, a new trial was held at the request of her family and King Charles VII. This posthumous retrial examined the original proceedings and declared her innocent, nullifying the 1431 verdict. Much later, in 1920, Joan of Arc was officially canonized as a saint by the Roman Catholic Church. The girl burned as a witch, and heretic ultimately became recognized as a holy figure, a testament to her enduring legacy and the injustice she faced. Number 1. Dame Alice Kittler, the rich Irish dame, her demon lover, and a witch hunt that made history. Hold on to your hats, because the story of Dame Alice Kittler of Kilkenny, Ireland, is one of the earliest and most sensational witchcraft cases in European history, happening way back in 1324. It's got everything: a wealthy, much-married woman, suspicious deaths, accusations of a demonic familiar, and a powerful bishop determined to bring her down. Alice Kittler was no downtrodden peasant. She was a prominent figure in Kilkenny, a successful moneylender who had accumulated considerable wealth. She'd been married 4 times, and each time her husbands had died, leaving her richer. This pattern alone was enough to raise eyebrows and make people whisper. Was it just bad luck for her husbands, or something more sinister? The chief accuser against Alice was Richard de Ladrede, the English Franciscan Bishop of Sorcery. He was a zealous man, deeply concerned with rooting out heresy and what he saw as demonic influences. And in Dame Alice Kittler, he found his prime target. The accusations he leveled against her and her associates were detailed, lurid, and explosive. First, Alice was accused of denying Christ and the authority of the Church, a fundamental charge of heresy. But it quickly got much more specific and magical. The bishop claimed that Alice and her followers sacrificed live animals, specifically red cockerels, to demons at crossroads, a place often associated with supernatural encounters. They supposedly tore the animals apart and scattered the pieces while invoking a demon. Then there were the potions. Alice was said to concoct magical brews and powders designed to make people fall in love with her, or to control them, or even to kill them. The alleged ingredients were disgusting and designed to cause revulsion. Things like spiders, black worms, the brains and clothes of a boy who died before baptism, the hair and fingernails from dead bodies, and even the supposedly used as a mixing bowl. Yikes! But the most shocking accusation, and the one that really set her case apart, was that Alice had a demonic familiar, an incubus demon, a male demon said to prey on women, named Robin, son of Art, or Robert Artsine. This demon, it was claimed, appeared to her in various forms, sometimes as a black cat, sometimes as a shaggy black dog, and sometimes as a black man described as an aethiops, an archaic term for an Ethiopian or dark-skinned person. Bishop Erdrude alleged that Alice had sexual relations with this demon, and that in return Robin gave her wealth, power, and her knowledge of sorcery. This is one of the earliest detailed accounts of a witch supposedly having a demonic pact sealed with sexual intimacy with a demon. The bishop also claimed that Alice used her sorcery to bring about the deaths of her first 3 husbands and to bewitch her 4th husband, Sir John the Poor. The idea was that she enchanted him so that he would turn over all his property and wealth to her and her favorite son from a previous marriage, William Outlaw. Indeed, Sir John's children from his own previous marriage were the ones who initially complained to the bishop, fearing disinheritance. The legal battle that followed was intense. Alice Kittler was a woman of means and influence, and she didn't just roll over. She had powerful friends who initially managed to protect her. At one point, Alice even used her connections to have Bishop Ledred himself arrested and imprisoned for 17 days. But the bishop was relentless. He eventually managed to turn the tables. A key moment came when Alice's servant, Petronilla de Meath, was arrested under severe duress, almost certainly including being flogged multiple times. The record states she was flogged 6 times. Petronilla confessed to everything Alice was accused of. She confirmed the demonic pacts, the sacrifices, the potions, and claimed Alice was the leader of a whole coven of witches in Kilkenny. Petronilla became the star witness against her mistress. Faced with Petronilla's damning and coerced confession, and realizing the bishop's power was now too great to overcome, Dame Alice Keiteler did something remarkable. She vanished. Mourned by her allies, she managed to flee Kilkenny, and then Ireland altogether, likely escaping to England or perhaps Flanders. She was never caught and never brought to trial herself. While Alice escaped, others were not so lucky. Her son, William Outlaw, who was also accused, managed to get off relatively lightly, partly by recanting and agreeing to perform public penance, like paying for the re-leading of the cathedral roof. But for Petronilla de Meath, there was no escape. Based on her own forced confession, she was condemned as a heretic and a witch. On November 3rd, 1324, Petronilla was burned at the stake in Kilkenny. She holds the grim distinction of being the first person in Ireland to be executed for the crime of heresy with strong undertones of witchcraft. Why is Alice Keiteler's case number 1? It's a landmark case. The incredible detail of the accusations, especially concerning the demonic familiar, Robin Artisan, and the idea of an organized coven, set a precedent and provided a template for future witch hunts. It showed how accusations of witchcraft could be used against wealthy and independent women, and how fear of female power and sexuality could be twisted into charges of demonic collusion. Alice's wealth, her multiple marriages, and her business dealings likely made her a target for resentment and suspicion. Her dramatic escape while saving her own life left her servant Petronilla to face a horrific fate, a tragic footnote in a story that echoes down the centuries as a chilling example of early medieval witch persecution.